Tonight's guest speaker really doesn't uh, require much introduction, as Carl joined Cape Centre a few years ago and very soon became a very well-known member. And we've all seen Carl at a number of star parties and spend a lot of time around Carl's scope and some of his camera equipment. But I'd just like to tell you guys a little bit about Carl before we start the physical meeting. So I asked Carl to write a little bio about himself. And Carl describes himself as a lifelong astronomer introduced into the excitement surrounding the space race to the moon in the 1960s. He studied classics and philosophy at Wesleyan University with a keen interest in epistemology and the history of science. He also studied theology at Harvard Divinity School and taught in the religious department of Phillips Exeter Academy, while also teaching intro to astronomy in the summer school there. Since he's written extensively about audiovisual technology and the internet for business publication. He fulfilled his lifelong dream of seeing the stars of the Southern Hemisphere, moving to Cape Town 3 years ago. So Carl, very welcome, and we really look forward to your talk tonight, telling us all about your experience of the 2017 solar eclipse, and how we can possibly prepare for the next one. So Carl, I'm officially going to hand over to you.
Very good. Thank you so much. And let me switch over. Now we get to the fun part. Let's see. I get to write a lot about technology. Let's see if I can master this. Okay, here we are. I wanted to start out our series here talking about a personal experience. And let me start with my personal history. As I said, it was a lifelong aspiration to see the southern stars 3 years ago, and there was only one terrible thing happened, which is that it interfered with another long-term appointment that I'd made. In 1979, I was unable to get to the last great eclipse in North America, and I remember I was all of 17 years old, and I wrote down in my calendar that I would be getting to the next one, which was in 2017, which seemed like an awful long ways away, and it was. So I moved to Cape Town and then made sure I scheduled things so that I made a trip back to clear out the rest of my gear to coincide with seeing the eclipse. So anyhow, this was a very long ambition to see a total solar eclipse, and I'd never made a special trek to catch one, but this was the one that I wanted to see. I thought I would just have it in my backyard, but I actually traveled 10,000 kilometers to go see this one, so figure how that worked. Anyway, as I put in the description of this was an eclipse expedition, which is terminology that brings to mind pith helmets and bushwhacking. And there is something of that here. And there are, as I promised in the description, elements of heroism and altruism. They do figure in, but not in quite the way that I might have hoped. So let me give a little bit of background here and history and context to what's so special about a total solar eclipse. And going back from the Greek philosopher Thales of Miletus to Einstein, and it's an incredible connection that we've had, the importance of total solar eclipse in the history of science. That it starts out according the entirety of the BC, when Thales of Miletus accurately predicted the total solar eclipse that happened on the 28th of May then. And that experience bookends very nicely with the eclipse of 29 May 1919, which is when Sir Arthur Stanley Eddington confirmed Einstein's prediction that the sun's gravity would bend the light of stars revealed in the eclipse as they passed near the solar disk. So we go all the way from the origins of abstract thinking, literally, to general relativity's confirmation, and total solar eclipses are intimately related to those. Anyhow, so now here we are, a century after this last great scientific discovery or confirmation of theory with that eclipse. And what do eclipses offer us today? And honestly, I'd say that what they are is an extraordinary opportunity for science education. If we understand how they operate and communicate that to the public, the celestial mechanics and all that make it possible for us to predict them and the other dynamics surrounding them, it's an extraordinary opportunity to fascinate the young, and with that we plant the seeds of wonder for tomorrow's scientists. So here's a diagram. Now, any graphics here that are not my own are courtesy of NASA. And this is NASA's overall diagram of what was going to happen on August 21st, 2017. As it says here, it was the first total solar eclipse on the continental United States in 38 years. And as you all know, I mean, a total solar eclipse is simply when the moon gets in front of the sun. And depending on the orbital dynamics and geometry, the eclipse will be of a certain length, and a certain intensity. Oh, yeah. So
there's the sun.
Can we have everybody mute? Thank you. Anyway, so with that, here is what the path of the eclipse looks like graphically. And you see the shadow of the moon passing over the Earth, and you'll see on the bottom right corner there, it describes the actual duration of the eclipse. And the eclipse in 2017, it wasn't particularly remarkable in this regard. It was only about 2.5 minutes long. The longest possible eclipse is about 7 or 7.5 minutes. So this was fair to middling, but as you can see, what was extraordinary is it went from sea to shining sea across the United States, starting in Oregon and ending in the Atlantic seaboard. Now, we'll look at another image of what this actually looked like from space. And if you look at this, you can see this is the 11. This is a million miles out in space. This is a montage or a animation from 11 photos taken from NASA's Earth Polychromatic Imaging camera on board the Deep Space Climate Observatory. And this, as you can see, this is what the eclipse looked like as it covered something like a total of 13,000 kilometers from end to end and took place over some 3 hours. Now, on the ground, the experience was quite different, of course, that it's not a 3-hour thing, it's a 2.5 minute thing, as I mentioned. Here again is the path of the eclipse. The longest, the greatest moment, is the greatest eclipse duration was somewhere in the middle of Tennessee towards Missouri. And altogether, though, I mean, starting out on the West Coast, it was just about 2 minutes. And so you didn't really get that. You got a little bit more time as it went through the center of the country. Now, on my travels, I was going to be on the eastern seaboard heading towards Austin, Texas, which just fortuitously took me right through the central line of the eclipse. Now, my initial plans with this were to start out. I had some friends down here in Sylva, North Carolina, and I first camped out there and figured that I would have a flexible plan of moving forward. That depending on the weather, I would give myself a day or two to travel to the clearest spot as close to the center line and greatest duration. Now, as it turned out, things were looking pretty decent in North Carolina. So the night before, I set up my telescope, had it properly polar aligned. It was all good. And then come morning, we were looking at partly cloudy weather, and things were clearing to the west. So I thought, well, I've got another eclipse party with some friends out towards Lebanon, North Carolina, which is just out of Nashville. And so what happened was that I figured if I started first thing in the morning, it would be approximately, it would take me about 4 hours to get to Lebanon. And my worst case scenario was that there was a parking lot, a truck stop just outside, which is right off of Route 40. And again, 266 miles, what about 400 kilometers. Shouldn't be a big deal. I-40 here, which is the big interstate, is a superhighway, which should be very easy to get to. There were lesser roads which would take longer, but I'd take the superhighway. Now, unfortunately, as I headed out, hopeful for clearer skies, that's what the superhighway looked like. So I don't know why I thought I would be the only person interested in going to the center line of the eclipse. Instead, I found myself competing with a large percentage of 330 million other Americans who'd had pretty much the same idea. So I got to about here when I realized that I might spend the eclipse sitting in my car if I didn't innovate very quickly. And so I started to map out where I might head. And the next stop, if I basically dropped out and went directly on back roads towards the center line, my best shot was towards Athens, Tennessee, which is where I finally managed to make it. Anyway, as I say, after gave up on this, went the back roads and made it to, this is just outside of Athens, a place called Sweetwater. And again, hordes of people all around. I had to creepy crawl around Sweetwater to get to the center line. And I arrived about a half hour before the partial eclipse began. Set up my telescope, which was an Astrotech AT111 EDT, which some of you folks have had a peer through here at Star Parties. And piggybacked on it is an AT72 ED Mark II, which actually I had planned on picking one up just for the eclipse. And unfortunately, the Astrotech folks explained to me that unfortunately the shipment of their new instrument was not going to arrive. It was a brand new design, an upgrade to a classic, and they were not expected to arrive until after the eclipse. And I asked what we might do about this. And I was fortunate enough that they sold me the production prototype, which is one of the most optically perfect refractors I've had the pleasure of owning. So as you see here, we've got it set up piggybacked. I've got various glass filters sitting on the front end, and a Sony A6300 mirrorless camera, which I was going to use for my primary imaging. And then for up close stuff, I was going to use the larger refractor for doing visual observing during the eclipse. And actually, if you look closely, you can see in the viewfinder there, I've actually, we're in the middle of the partial eclipse. Now, even at this moment, though, things were dicey in that this was as I was setting up what the skies looked like. And then as the eclipse was getting underway, This was frightening. Again, one of the terrifying things about a total solar eclipse is despite whatever plans you may have, you're going to face a catastrophic outcome if one single cloud that lingers over the sun and moon for a few minutes takes this away from you. Now, notice we actually had a number of really good sunspot groups, which was very, very helpful in the setup. Here I'm out of focus, but this is one of the things, the great thing about having sunspots as you prepare for the eclipse is that you've got something to focus on. So as we got further underway, again, we've got these nice sunspots, and one of the real issues that I found was a crisis of conscience. Because here I'd set up. Now I might add that I showed up at this last moment opportunity, pulled over into a farmer's field, and I was most amused where a fellow driving a tractor quickly pulled up. Didn't throw me out for trespassing. Instead, he requested the $20 for me to lease my spot, which I was more than pleased to pay at that point. There were an awful lot of people on lawn chairs out and around. And of course, these people who had traveled from across the continent to come to this asked, could they have a look through the telescope? And what can I tell you? As I say, a crisis in conscience. And I pretty quickly determined that let's see how well I can juggle the interest of about a half a dozen eager people to have a look at this thing versus my own interest in trying to record and capture it. And so I had about a half a dozen people queued up. And as things went forward, I also, in addition to the main rig, I also had a Panasonic FZ1000 super zoom digital camera just on a tripod setup, shooting 4K video as my backup. The ultra zoom goes to 400 millimeter, so it was a pretty decent view, and I knew I would capture something if no matter what happened. So as we went into it, this is actually a still captured from the 4K video, and it's not too bad. So as we go through, that's again, we get the diamond ring effect, but more than that, let me get to, so we get to the, we had a pretty decent observing session while we're in the partial eclipse, and it was very easy to attract people and show them the sunspots, as we do very typically for such outreach events. But then what I'll play for you now is the video itself from the video camcorder, and what you'll get is the adventure that went on at the eyepiece. Again, 2.5 minutes, and the first civilian up, I had a look, surveyed the prominences, and I can't tell you just what an extraordinary experience of seeing a solar prominence in natural light with no filter, directly with your own vision, again, unmediated by a lot of technology and trickery to get past the solar glare. So after I had had a good look, I handed over the eyepiece and started letting people go forward. The very first person in line jostled the telescope. So you can imagine. Now, after having done that, and he was, we had to kind of disentangle him and then quickly realign. Then that same character took out his cell phone and wanted to take a picture. So what a joy. The first guy in line turns out to be an eyepiece hog, but he was moved quickly along, and the other people got a glimpse, and it all went well. But let me just play for you so you'll get some sense of the actual duration of the event. What actually happened, you'll hear the my confrontation with the fellow that jostled the telescope. You'll hear the clicking of the camera as I'm working hard at snapping photos through the 72 millimeter while people are looking through the main glass. And then I'll get into talking afterward about the processing of the images and what went well and poorly in the actual image capture. So without further ado, here is in real time the 2017 eclipse. And again, this is the super zoom camera shooting 4K at, and here we have, again, Aldebaran's right here. And this is, and you'll see it move slowly across the screen, which is just the drift of the sun and moon on without, since I wasn't guiding on this, or rather that this was just a tripod stationary. And somebody's flying around in a helicopter. The use of running video is great because you pick up the audio, and depending on what your setting is, you'll hear crowd reactions. And again, in the background here, what you can hear is are the crickets that came out thinking that it was dark, or the coming of darkness. And again, all you're really seeing, you see the streamers from the corona, which again are stationary over this period of time. And then as we'll come to the other diamond ring effect in just a moment. But again, this is what's possible. This is my backup, my emergency backup safety net, which is just a super zoom camera at 400 millimeter recording 4K video. And what's very useful about that is that from 4K video, you get 8 megapixel stills, which are pretty decent quality. The downside to this, of course, is that what you pull from the video is strictly JPEGs. You'd need some very fancy video equipment to shoot RAW to be able to do some serious post-processing. And again, this is all automatic. I let the exposure set itself automatically. So it's not the best I might have gotten, but again, this was just a backup. And we're going to come out of it in just a moment. And again, this was you can see there are prominences here and here, although they're overexposed in the video. We'll get to that in just a moment. And that's all she wrote. So now, afterward, what I got from it, inevitably, the problem with making last-minute changes in your plans and relocating and this sort of thing, and setting up in a different location is that you inevitably run into mistakes. And what happened was that I did not quite get the exposure I'd hoped to get. The two things I wanted to get were, on the one hand, and again, let me switch screens again and go towards okay. So what the two images I wanted to get were first the solar prominences, and then also the corona. And the corona came out were pretty decent with the with the 72 millimeter. This is the scale of it, and this was the JPEG that just came through. Just now, the fun afterward came with processing the images, but I'll just throw in another helpful hint. First, if you plan to go to the 2024 eclipse in North America, again, don't plan on making a whole lot of long distance traveling day of the show, just because the traffic has to be figured in, and the traffic means that you're probably not going to go very far. And the second thing is, after the event ends, don't plan to get very far from your eclipse site. And that I made the mistake of thinking I would carry on to in my journey towards Austin, and basically the traffic made it totally pointless. So I may as well have just camped out and processed the images at this point. Now, what I discovered, again, that the various exposure settings I had was that I had overexposed on seeing the prominences. Here is the JPEG, and again, let me switch to. All right, let me. Okay, so this is the raw image that I had intended to catch the prominences. As you see, it's overexposed. So fortunately, one of the things we can do by working in RAW is we can manipulate the image and see if we've got the data still in there to retrieve the prominences. And lo and behold, that was entirely possible. As you can see here, they pop out if you drop the exposure to the max and increase the contrast. For our viewers who are, just joined us, that we started out with an overexposed shot that was intended to catch the solar prominences. And by bringing the exposure way down and the contrast way up, we're able to capture the prominences that were so very visible visually and were quite striking. Now, to do this again, though, I think you really need more than you need two telescopes to really get to both get the the full breadth of the corona, and then separately to go focus on the prominences. So here I was trying to hit a balance between the two. As you can see, the image scale is challenging, just because you're again, let me see what I can do for. Bring this back a bit, and you can see we get the Sony A6300, which actually for what it is not a bad camera, is 20 megapixels, so you've got a whole lot to crop to. As you can see here, we're starting to pixelate. Now, the other challenge I had, I was pretty much, I wasn't at a great altitude, and the seeing is only decent. And of course, anybody knows from solar observing at sea level that you get all the atmospheric effects are going to harm your seeing enormously. And here, I was hoping I'd see detail as fine as, for example, lunar ridges, but that just wasn't possible. But the resolution isn't too bad, given what we've got here. And again, this is a world different. This is not a bad rescue, given that we started out with this. So if you'd just been shooting JPEGs, that's all you'd have gotten of that. But by having the raw data pulled right off the sensor, you're able to go from that to that, which is a much better depiction and a much cleaner shot. So with that, I just throw so I mean, honestly, what I got out of this experience was two good shots, which let me return to them, which basically the oh, we've got other people in the waiting room. Let's see. Let me see if I can find. Okay, wait, the two shots are that, which again is pretty much what I showed before, but properly cropped to give the full scale. And then the one that we saw in the in our initial, in the cover shot, which is that. Oop. And there. Now, the thing I'd like to add here, just in closing, the next go around, the one improvement I'll make very seriously, and again, there's so much that you can add with camera control that here I don't think I took full advantage of. I was shooting fully manually to try to get the exposures just so. And as you see that in a rush, you're not going to do that. But one thing that most contemporary cameras can do is bracket. So they'll shoot a range of different exposures so you get a wider latitude to go capture your raw images from and then play with. So in 2024, I perfectly plan to do that when the next eclipse hits in North America. Now, another thing I'd just like to add, just the opportunities for education, and that as much as the total eclipse is an emotional experience as much as anything else. I mean, quite honestly, it's one of those events where you almost wonder if it's better to just set aside all of the, all of the technology and just experience the event in all its glory. It's sort of like I had the similar experience almost 2 years ago now when we went to go visit the SKA, and in the middle of at midnight with the Milky Way at full zenith, a pillar horizon to horizon, we just got out of the car and took that in without the need for any instrumentation. That was just plenty enough with the naked eye. A total solar eclipse is perfectly fine as a naked eye experience. So whether provided of course with the proper safety filters in the lead up, but if you're going to go the technology route or wish to share that with other people with technology, again, with any luck, you'll be at a place where you can set up the night before and be well prepared without having to scramble through traffic. But again, the thing I'd like to add, other than the visual and emotional experience of the total eclipse, the tremendous opportunity to try to plant the seeds of science education to gather people's interest and attention. And one of the things I think that's very powerful in explaining about a total eclipse is the fact that these are an ephemeral phenomenon. They're not forever and for always. They're fleeting in our experience, but also in the history of the solar system. I think many of us were quite startled recently with the discovery that the rings of Saturn are an ephemeral phenomenon, and that that in fact in 300 million years, that the rings that we find so glorious and so exciting in both our personal viewing and then also for sharing and outreach, that they'll be a memory, provided there's anybody here 300 million years from now to remember. So they're going to steadily diminish over time. Likewise, the moon is withdrawing from the Earth at about 4 centimeters a year. And explaining the reasons for that, again, as far as science education, it's wonderful to explain to people why all total eclipses are not the same length, depending on the perigee and apogee of the position of the moon in regard to where it's at in its orbit, whether it's near or far, apogee or perigee. Likewise, in the Earth's orbit around the sun, whether it is near or far in its elliptical orbit. But in addition to all of this, the Earth-Moon dynamics, where the moon is retreating at about 4 centimeters a year, which is, of course is a minuscule amount, except over time, where little by slowly, as the moon retreats from the Earth, that the length possible for a total eclipse shrinks. And we're also familiar with annular eclipses. Those eclipses, the total, what should be or could be a total eclipse, except that the moon is at the far point in its orbit, and so it won't completely cover the sun. And as time goes on, annular eclipses will become more and more common. Total eclipses will become a greater and greater rarity until about, they predict about 600 million years from now that total solar eclipses will no longer occur. Now, what's exciting for me about explaining the particulars of that is getting into the why, which is that it's a perfect example of the conservation of angular momentum, that the Earth Moon system, with them both rotating around a common center, which just happens to be deep within the Earth, that the Earth is slowly slowing down in its rotation. And to conserve angular momentum, that's what, to do that, the moon is moving back those 4 centimeters. And so just understanding that relationship and this, this very important scientific principle of the conservation of angular momentum, that is the way we hook people into science education. First, the excitement and the emotional power of seeing a total solar eclipse, and then for those that are interested in these things, to get into the particulars of exactly how does this work. Anyway, so now the next thing I'll just add is that, again, 2024, that we'll have actually a much better North American eclipse that will be passing actually right through central Texas and onward through New England. The max for it will be in northern Mexico, and then it'll arc through Texas and then on towards northern New England. And then what we have to look forward to in South Africa, I'm sure we've got a few people here who saw the eclipses in both 2001 and 2002. But we've got a really good one coming up in 2010 that, in fact, Durban will be right about on the center line. And that should be, I hope to see you all there. And again, you may wish to come to see the great North American eclipse of 2024 to practice. So anyway, with that, let me open it up to any questions you have. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Cole. You're handing control back to me.
I am indeed. Let me see how let me quickly do that.
To everyone, basically, Carl's going to allow a quick Q&A session for us. And if you look at the bottom of your screen, you'll see there's a little reactions button. And if you click on it, it will allow you to raise your hand. And what we will then do is just unmute you and say who the person is that can actually ask their question.
Kelly, go right ahead.
Well, I was more trying to applaud than raise my hand.
Oh.
I got the wrong icon, but obviously you had very good luck. I was doing that eclipse with 200 people in a sky and telescope group in Hopkinsville, Kentucky. We had really great skies as well. And one of the things I continue to do for Sky and Telescope is to plan eclipse tours. So right now you mentioned the one coming up in 2024. On my radar, the next one is this coming December, which will be in Chile and Argentina. And we're watching the whole travel industry quite carefully to see if that's still going to come off. We have 2 groups. One is going on a cruise ship, and the other is going to be in Argentina. And it's not so much the getting there that's going to be the edgy part for us. It's whether those countries will be allowing foreigners to enter freely at that time. So it's a little bit of a gamble.
Well, absolutely. As we were discussing before the session, that it's going to be very interesting to see at what point South Africa is going to allow visitors in after we've made such an investment in tackling the the contagion. But to say that I think we've got a number of very interesting eclipses coming up over the next 10 years, some in Northern Africa and then in Spain and Europe. So actually we've got at least on I think we've got a very exciting number of eclipses coming. But as you know, Kelly, and everybody should know, total eclipses are actually fairly common. You've just got to have the will to go, and then hopefully no disaster like the coronavirus to interfere with your plans. And hopefully, again, we're hoping that the airline industry survives, and that hopefully the era of relatively inexpensive international travel will return. But yeah, we're only going to catch the very, very tail end of the eclipse. We're going to just miss it here. We'll get a partial in South Africa this December. So any questions anyone has? First of all, just curious if you can raise your hands or just respond. How many people here have actually seen a total solar eclipse?
Yes. 2 Peters.
Yes, absolutely. Wyoming.
All right.
I went to the center of the total eclipse in 2020. Where was it? 2001. 2001 in Zambia.
Yeah.
So these Germans had worked out exactly where the precise spot was for maximum totality, and decided that they would have a trance party there with big international DJs, and so a whole stack of people descended. I was living in Uganda at the time, so I went across in some very ramshackle way to the middle of Zambia, and then had a whole week's trance party dancing to limber us all up before the actual eclipse took place. So we were really all geared up for it. It was fantastic. We danced throughout the eclipse. Well, I didn't. I stood there with my mouth open.
And then I gather that just a year later, the path of totality went through Joburg.
Limpopo, yeah. Except it was cloudy.
Oh,
only a bit. It was okay. It wasn't too bad, but just at the maximum moment, it was a bit cloudy.
That was. Can you hear me? That was from Johannesburg. We were up in the northern Transvaal, and we actually drove about 6 kilometers to get out of the cloud, and we saw a perfect eclipse. We had about 3 or 4 minutes in which to set the telescope up and realign it again. No pictures, unfortunately.
So Peter, you're familiar with the mad last minute scramble. And again, the debate I had was, now the business about being at the exact maximum moment, maximum spot is one thing, but much more important is where you are in the center line. Yeah. That if you're towards the edge, you're going to lose a whole lot more time of totality than being a bit off from being at the maximum spot in the entire path of the eclipse. So the thing for me was just to get off the highway and get as close to the center. And actually, in the end, I was approximately 200 meters from the dead center line, and was only I lost about 10 seconds of totality from the maximum possible. And again, at 2 minutes and 40 seconds, not a particularly remarkable length of an eclipse. And I asked Kelly, what's the longest eclipse that you've seen?
6 minutes and 39 seconds on a cruise ship in 2012, I think, off the coast of Iwo Jima.
That's a monster.
Yeah, that was the longest totality in the 21st century. So I don't expect to top that.
Yeah, I think that the next in between now and 6000 AD, the longest one is about 150 years hence, which will clock in at about 7.5 minutes. So 6.5 is pretty amazing. But
Oh,
I guess the thing to say is though that even 2.5 minutes, the one in 2010 coming is about a 2 minute and 20 second, but it doesn't really matter. I mean, it really comes down to just eyepiece time, but it's so overwhelming and outrageous that the experience is so qualitatively extraordinary that the quantity of it is not nearly as important. Particularly if if you're a connoisseur and if you've been to a bunch, then you get picky. But for those who've not experienced a total eclipse before, it doesn't matter if it's 2 minutes or 5. But yeah, I'm sure that if you've been to a bunch, then it's a different matter. Now, again, I'll throw out there who it looks like we've only got about maybe 25% of our visitors here have actually seen the total eclipse. And I guess that means A, that there's good business ahead for Sky and Telescopes tours. And again, those are available, not an impossible thing. I'm not quite sure how you transport people's equipment to go capture these things appropriately. And another time, I'd love to know if you can set up a mount on the deck of a cruise ship. But that's a challenge.
So let me address that. The answer is yes. And the reason is that modern cruise ships are actually quite well stabilized. And so the cruise ship during totality is not standing still, but is cruising at a slow coast, if you will. And that helps the auto stabilizers keep the ship on an even keel. The bigger issue with cruise ships is to make sure that the captain has disengaged the automatic lights so that when it gets dark during totality, the lights on the ship don't come on automatically. But you know, Carl, it probably would not have been good for the very long focal length stuff that you had there, but for modest, you know, for modest telephoto lenses, 400 millimeters or something like that, and maybe comparable visual telescopes, those are perfectly okay.
Well, I say one of the things, just as a practical matter, that given the seeing conditions in the middle of the day, mind you, the sun has just dropped out of the sky, so the temperature has suddenly shifted radically. And that means the air is going to be full of convection currents, which means the seeing, I know, again, Kelly, you probably got a better handle on this. I just think that just in theory, that the possibility for having an incredibly steady, clear experience for high magnification viewing is probably poor.
Yeah, it depends a lot on the circumstance. Obviously, that one with 6 minutes and 39 seconds, for example, the sun was dead overhead, and so and we were quite near the equator, so it was pretty hot. There was a lot of convection. The interesting thing is, you had been worried about clouds. A lot of time, you know, the cumulus clouds are a convection-driven phenomenon, and a lot of times clouds actually dissipate around the time of totality because there's no heating, and so you might think you're under a cloudy sky, and then suddenly it clears up. For an eclipse in 2013, I think, I'm repeating myself, maybe also on a cruise ship, we were in beautifully clear skies, steaming right along the center line, and not long after totality, the clouds started to build up, and we kind of squeaked it in.
Well, that's terrific. Again, I'm so glad you joined us here, and that that must have been quite something to have your fears allayed, as it were.
Yeah, with all those people counting on you to show them totality. Looking for those of you who might want to come here to my home in the U.S. for the 2024 eclipse, it's true what Carl said, that maximum is in Mexico, but not far to the northeast in south central Texas. The path goes over San Antonio and Austin, and I think even Dallas, and you've only lost a few maybe 10 seconds of the duration of that eclipse. And especially if you're thinking about flying to the U.S., obviously Dallas is a major hub, and I would encourage you to look in Dallas. It takes place in mid-April, and so even those of us who are here in New England who are living not far from the center line, April in New England, it can snow, and so we're not going to be. I personally am not going to be anywhere near New England for that. I'm probably going to be on a cruise ship off the coast at Mazatlan, with one hand on the focusing knob and the other hand on my Corona beer.
Hey, here's a thought. Since I work partly with the NRAO, the National Registry in Socorro, which is near Albuquerque, and hence this wonderful sweatshirt that I have here of the very large array. Maybe I could talk to those folks and see if we can go and hang out at the very large radio telescope array, because I bet they're not far from Dallas.
And it's interesting you should mention that, because in 2023 there's an annular solar eclipse in the United States that goes right over Albuquerque.
Okay.
And if you've ever wanted to visit the amazing national parks of the American West, the Rocky Mountains, and of course, since solar eclipses occur at new moon, the skies will be quite dark in some of the more remote areas. That annular eclipse is going to be wonderful, and will be in that part, over Albuquerque and near the Very Large Array. I don't think the Very Large Array itself is in the path, but I have to check.
Also, it happens that the Austin Astronomical Society's former observatory, which is unfortunate that it won't, they've now moved off, but that the Eagle, Brian, you can help us out here. The Eagle Eye Observatory is right smack dab in the center line of the 2024 eclipse path.
That's correct. Hang on a second. Let me get the mask off. I'm at work here. I'm watching the space launch today. So, yeah, what you see in the background, what I'm using for a virtual background, is the parallel mount I made to go to Wyoming to watch 2017 eclipse, which is pretty awesome, the 4-minute one. So we're all getting geared up for the one here that's coming in 2024. We've got some friends with some land that we're already reserving a slot on it, and they're really close to the center. They're about, I think, 4 miles off of dead center. So you should be able to do okay anywhere along the paths that have just been mentioned on this whole Zoom gathering here. I don't know anything about San Antonio. I haven't actually looked up the path yet. But as far as I know, our new home, which is Pedernales State Park, we have a container drop in there. We're working on it every weekend, get it finished out. I think that's pretty close to center line. I'll have to look it up geographically.
Yeah, it's there's going to be, well, again, it's wide open in Texas, so there should be tremendous opportunities to get. Unfortunately, it won't be. Central Texas is not particularly high altitude, so you're not going to get high and dry in the desert. Again, for better seeing, but and again, you don't really. As we were saying, we're talking about really a wide field. This is like you're not going to do a lot of high-powered observing. That's not really what this is about, to really capture the event. Although it'd be nice to go get the solar prominences, but there's no guarantee that there'll be great solar prominences. Again, I was thrilled that we had a couple of sunspots in 2017, so I had something to focus on.
We had 3.
Oh, yeah.
One of them grew the day before, if you will, just came up, and they were all big. We got to watch it gobble them all up with just white light filters. This time around, a lot of us are starting to collect our hydrogen alpha telescopes and our white light telescopes and the full range of things, so that we can get the maximum experience and the maximum information visible. I mean, binoculars like the ones that I took, probably going after it with a 4.5-inch triplet refractor. May use a Herschel wedge this time. Dawn Davies just got her a Lunt. She and I both have the same Lunt model, fully double stacked now. We're out messing with them with auto trackers. Not just for this event. I mean, we're starting to, of course, go up towards a Solar Max. There's some cool stuff to see. We just haven't had any actual sunspots or really big prominences recently. It's like somebody just took a Bic shaver and just shaved the sun. It's all smooth.
It doesn't do much for our outreach activities when the sun refuses to cooperate.
No, sir, it doesn't. You can see things on a hydrogen alpha, and you can learn to see that. And I might even get a calcium K module doing some research on that. However, you're right. White light, it's kind of boring right now. Has been for a while.
Yeah.
Paul,
Very good.
may I suggest that we take some of the questions from the audience? I see Willem has had his hand up. So maybe Willem, if you can unmute Willem, and Willem can pose his own question.
Willem, go ahead.
I think Willem may have dropped off, so we'll go to next in line. I see Martin, you had a question as well.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Bob. Thank you.
Okay, great. Very informative there, Carl. Thanks very much. Just one question, really, and that is, with the pressure of having to set up camera equipment, etc., how did that detract from your experience of the actual eclipse? What would you recommend a first timer do? Concentrate on the usual panic stations of trying to set something up in time and not really experiencing the eclipse totality as sort of in depth as one should. What is your recommendation, having been through that?
Well, it depends on your personality type. As a type A American, I couldn't help but to multitask and do way too much because I was running a star party as well as just stupid. It was insane. And I just was on an adrenaline high, flying along the back roads of Tennessee. This is like, roads that only like the guys running moonshine ride on. I mean, there were dirt roads. It was like, I'm looking at the GPS and, desperately trying to figure out how I can get to the center line. So it was, I would not recommend what I did. Ideally, I would have been, actually, the place I started out in North Carolina turned out to be beautiful, clear skies. So that entire layer of adventure was completely unnecessary. But, again, you see a cloud and you freak out. I've been waiting 39 years. So I'm like, how am I going to let this happen? So sometimes it is the best action is no action at all. You just stay put and take your chances. So again, I would, there's a very strong case for just going en naturel, bring a pair of binoculars and that's it. Honestly, as I say, I often wonder whether, particularly if it's your first time experience, whether you're best to just go it and experience it like the ancients did, and a non-technological go at it, because it's extraordinary. I mean, you see this enormous black eye in the sky, and you experience what's happening in nature around you as well. And again, it's this peculiarity of our hobby. And I always wonder at our outreach when one of the things I love to do is run the my little Celestron adapter so that people with their cell phone cameras can get pictures. And I've always wondered as to why people love to do that, but they do. But then someone looking at what we do with our amateur gear, taking photos that can't possibly compare with the professional stuff, but we do it too. So we like to have that personal experience. So I leave it really up to, the simple solution is to do more than one eclipse. And again, that you'll find that the folks at Sky and Telescope are more than happy to accommodate that. So.
Certainly we are. But
the problem is they charge dollars.
I want to echo what Carl said. Let's see, I'm on you. You know, I've seen about 13 total solar eclipses now, and I'm never been one to do much with photography. Carl, you did more photography in one eclipse than I've done in all 12 put together. And I would encourage people who are seeing one for the first time to do it visually. An 80 millimeter f5 or f6 refractor will be just fine for visual viewing. If you want to take pictures, what I recommend doing is take your cell phone or just a little point and shoot camera, set it up on a tripod nearby, and don't point it at the sun, point it at you and whoever is with you. You'll record all of the wonderful sounds. You'll record yourself jumping up and down, you know, crying, whatever the emotion might be. And you'll always be able to find good pictures of that eclipse so that you can show people what the eclipse looked like. But
good advice, yes.
You won't have an opportunity to recreate the moment the way a video, just a simple video of you and your surroundings. And the other thing I would do is remember that there's more to a total solar eclipse than just totality, just the corona and the prominences. The temperature drops sometimes 10 Celsius during totality. Animals and birds have strange behaviors. The sky takes on weird colors all around because you're in the middle of a shadow cone, and all around you outside the shadow it's daylight. So you look all around the horizon and it's twilight colored. You can look for bright stars and planets. You can look for shadow bands, which are a weird kind of curtainy atmospheric effect that plays out on the ground. It's such a multi-sensory experience. A friend of mine, longtime friend named Norman Sperling, it's something called Sperling's rule, which is no matter how long totality actually lasts, it only seems like it lasts for 8 seconds. And so unlike what Carl just did to scare you, all right, I would not invest a lot of time and trouble if it's your first time banking everything on getting like the very best pictures. I would, if you want to take some pictures, fine. In fact, you can even hold your cell phone up to the eyepiece and take pictures during totality quite easily. I would just enjoy as he said, the naturalness of it and the incredible phenomenon that it is.
Well, it's funny when we had our outreach for the total lunar eclipse 2 years ago. And probably the most striking thing about the whole experience, we had something like 3,000 people gathered, and a shout rose from the crowd. And that was such a powerful human moment. It was just a match it was the human response to the cosmos. And I think the thing I remember, because I've seen innumerable lunar eclipses, but that was that was a lifetime memory. And I think those of us, there are a number of us who were here for that, it was just absolutely singular. So other questions? I guess we've got Richard Sessions. Richard. Richard, are you with us? Can you unmute?
Okay, can you hear me now?
We can.
You can hear me. Okay. That was really enjoyable talk. I have a question and a couple of comments. Did you personally feel the temperature?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, it was mid to late August in Tennessee, which is pretty hot. And so suddenly we got relief from the heat. And it was a nice cooling thing. And again, you could hear the crickets come out. And again, I'll reiterate, Kelly, I wish I had known to go catch a video of my expressions, but it's funny. I inadvertently did that by rolling the video on the Super Zoom, and again, you couldn't quite. I talked over it, but you heard. If you listen carefully, I'm ushering the eyepiece hog away from my telescope. It's like, get the camera, get your cell phone out of your hand, out of the eyepiece, and move along. But so there are great human moments that you definitely want to capture. And But yeah, you do feel the temperature drop, and it's quite startling. Oh,
Yeah.
it was something like that. That was sort of the experience.
Okay. Carl, a couple of comments, Carl.
Sure.
We've attended two total eclipses. We've seen one. We were on one in 1992 in the middle of June, in the middle of the South Atlantic Ocean. And that was cloudy. We got a few glimpses of the partial stage of the sun. I took a few photos with the research ship rolling about 15 degrees either way, but then it clouded over completely, but there was a very low cloud base. So in totality, we saw the shadow underneath the cloud base rushing over the ship. Quite spectacular.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Yeah, we went to the one in 2002 in northeast of the country. We camped out at a place called Chapezi, and then the next morning we strung out thousands of people on farmers' fields along the way, and some people were lucky and some weren't. We just happened to be lucky. It was cloudy for most of the past stages, and we had 3 minutes of clear skies and totality arrived. And we took a train trip to get there.
Well, I love that. That's a very interesting point, that you got this interesting projection of the moon shadow on the cloud layer, which would be quite striking. So,
yeah, it was seen from underneath. The previous few days, the ship had been rolling in 6-meter swells just about every day. The next day wasn't too bad, but it was rolling about 15 degrees either way. And I was trying to get photographs, and I managed to get about 1 in every 4 in the viewfinder of the partial stages. But then, as I said, it became completely cloudy. And the rest of the crew on board were very impressed with this shadow. They'd never seen anything like it.
Well, that's true. That's another thing that you do see is the again, the movement of the shadow across the face of the Earth. If you're looking at the far horizon, you can see this thing moving along at supersonic speeds. It's moving at quite a clip. Other questions or comments? Are there eclipse experiences that anybody wishes to share? John, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks very much. Very interesting. I only attended one eclipse and another 3/4 eclipse, and I was very fortunate because we were about 35,000 feet up in South African Air Force, which was for us, and we flew south towards totality, south of the country towards totality from Cape Town, and then we flew along the path of the eclipse and extended totality by about a minute, I think. Nearly a minute. So we had a nice long period of totality, and then seeing that from the aircraft, seeing the shadow of the moon approaching over the clouds and the whole sky darkening, it was an incredible experience. Certainly my greatest experience and only experience of a solar total eclipse. I would love to see one from the ground, but I was very fortunate to be on that flight. And it was something that remains with you for the rest of your life, fantastic.
Great idea. We should bring back the Concorde and then chase an eclipse supersonic speeds to to get the maximum effect. And this we can offer this to Sky and Telescope. We'll bring back the Concorde.
And we nearly missed it. The pilots were late in getting off the ground in Pretoria, and then they had to fly to Cape Town and then out over the sea. So we were behind schedule and had to open the throttles flat out, nearly break the sound barrier all the way. It was very, very exciting in many respects. And then the commander tilted the plane so we could get a really good view. But you still, of course, are enclosed to the metal tube. You can't get out and feel the atmosphere. But we saw a lot through those small perspex windows, and it was quite amazing. Certainly one of the great experiences.
Well, now, Kelly, I do know, I remember talking to somebody at Sky and Telescope, perhaps it was you, about watching an eclipse from having one of the expeditions in a commercial jetliner, and that it was towards the horizon. So that's perfectly possible as well.
Yeah, and in fact, we did that with the one just passed in July of 2019, last July. We had a group on the ground in Chile, but we also chartered a LATAM A321, And you can only do that when, as you mentioned, when the sun is down near the horizon, because otherwise the angle gets too steep to actually look out the window profitably. There was, during that same eclipse, there was a group that chartered a 787 out of Easter Island, and they got something like 7.5 minutes of totality because they were flying along the path at, you know, pretty fast speeds, and managed to extend totality for quite a long time. So yeah, I've done 3 total eclipses from an airplane, and it's a remarkable experience. It's a different experience, not only because, well, of course you're looking through glass, so there's a little bit of inconvenience there, but you get to see the shadow play out on the ground. You literally get to see the dark shadow of the moon coming across the earth and overtaking your plane, and that is dramatic in and of itself.
Fabulous. No, yeah. Given the difference between the sea or the air, which is more stable? I guess it depends on the ocean, whether it's high seas or not. That Richard was telling us about being in a rough sea, then the stabilizers are going to have quite a problem.
Yeah, I mean, the plane is quite stable. There's a little high frequency vibration from the engines and such. And again, because you're looking through glass, you know, photographs aren't nearly as crisp as you might like them to be, but you're guaranteed of seeing the eclipse. That's for sure.
Well, yeah, that's a good trade-off. 100% certain that. Peter, would you like to say?
I would like to ask Kelly if Fred Espenak is still doing his predictions and producing a vast amount of data that he produced years ago.
I didn't catch the last part of that, Peter. Whether Fred's doing his predictions and what?
As he was some years ago. Does he still run his website?
Okay, so Fred has retired from NASA.
Okay.
He had been working for NASA Goddard, and if you go to his old website, it's still there. They haven't taken it down, but it's not being updated at all. Fred now has his own website for eclipses, which is called EclipseWise, W-I-S-E, EclipseWise.com. And there you can look at all of the predictive eclipses that you know him for. One of the latest innovations is to make it an interactive experience. You can call up an eclipse path and click. It's basically a Google map of the Earth, and you zoom in on the path, which is sort of painted on the Earth. And anywhere you click within that path, it gives you instantaneously the circumstances, how long totality lasts, what the location of the sun is in the sky, what the times are for the various contacts. There's another guy named Xavier Hubier, which also, he's got a comparable site. And the third person I'd like to point out to you is Jay Anderson, who's quite famous as a meteorologist who specializes in eclipses. Also has a website with a lot of good maps and information, plus all the all-important weather information. And that website is Eclipsophile, Eclipse, ECLIPSOPHILE, eclipsophile.com. And that's a great resource. He's managed to pull together all kinds of meteorological information that tells you, where the best places to go would be.
No, that sounds terrific, because we saw 2 eclipses. One was in Turkey in 1998,
Right.
99, and then the one in Malawi in 2002. And the amount of information we got from Fred's website was terrific.
Well, Peter, it sounds like you and your wife are overdue to see another one.
Yes.
We think so too.
Yes. I want to come back to Carl's mention of the eclipse through Durban. It's 2030.
That's
and
right,
it's
2030.
25th of November, exactly a month before Christmas. And it's about 9 in the morning, but the sun rises at 4:30, 5. So the sun will already be, at comfortable degrees for viewing. So we're counting on still being around to see it. Don't know whether we will be, but we'll, fingers crossed.
Well, and you know, there total eclipses of the sun happen about every 18 months on average. And there are some real diehards out there that must see every one, and annulars too. But I would suggest to people who've not seen one before is don't wait for 2030 for the one that passes near you. A lot of people go on eclipse trips to see interesting parts of the world. And you get to see that interesting part of the world. And if you happen to see the eclipse, that's sort of gravy, right? A little icing on the cake. I had the really good fortune, you mentioned Turkey, in 2006, I got to see an eclipse from the Sahara Desert in Libya, in that small, narrow window when you could go to Libya safely.
Yes.
And it was a completely remarkable experience, one that I'll treasure.
No, they're quite remarkable. And, you know, the feeling, it's sort of almost an out-of-world experience when you see that black ball of nothingness.
Yeah.
That is, it affects the human psyche, I think. Anyhow, that's another issue.
I think all amateur astronomers are crazy about eclipses, and I think tonight's talk, Carl's talk, and all the questions have just honed our enthusiasm, and I think we're all raring to go. Thank you all very much indeed.